you want to get, if you want to get in the conversation, you got to follow the crowd. And that's the challenge of art, right? Because artists have to eat, right? You're not going to work at Stop and Shop and then do art. It's a full-time commitment, but it takes massive funding. But when you get funded, interpretation. You see what I mean? So that's the 30s and 40s. So again, after World War II, this whole notion, urbanization, sophistication, more urban, but we know there's still many blacks in the South, rural South Carolina, rural Louisiana, okay, who are suffering from poverty, who's suffering from, lack of good healthcare access. Okay, so who's doing art for those individuals, right? Next, so now we go to the Black arts movement. So remember, during the Civil Rights movement, we see that what? Freedom songs, we see the role of Black artists, entertainers, Nina Simone, Harry Belafonte, right, would come down and give free concerts to raise funds. But we also find by the Black Power era, this whole Black arts movement. So we're revisiting this question again. What is the Black aesthetic? How do we define it? Art that defines Black struggle, but if Black people struggling every day can I have art of a Black middle class family who's successful? Is that any less authentic than what? People who are struggling? Okay. So we find the Black arts movement, BAM, was influenced by Black cultural nationalism, right? That Black culture is a unique culture shaped by Africa, shaped by living in America, okay? And that the art should reflect that. Literature, movies, novels, right? Should have that. However, let's say you're an artist who says, I want to do something different. How about a Black couple in a white neighborhood, right? They're still Black. Who's right, who's wrong? Okay, so we see that kind of tension, right? That we're trying to create an aesthetic. However, everyone's not going to fit in that aesthetic, and as artists, you shouldn't have to. And we'll get to some of the artists' work on the Davis collection. And finally, we have blaxploitation films, okay, and uplift films, okay. So we know Shaft. In 1971, Melvin Van Peebles created a movie called Sweet Sweet Badass Song, okay, which ushered in blaxploitation films, highly oversexed, racial gender stereotypes. What made the film revolutionary was how he funded the film. There's a movie about it, how he did it, right? He declared it was pornography. Bill Cosby lent him $50,000. The film was a success, right? And opened the door for Gordon Parks, who did these films with Shaft, right? They're urban, suspenseful, sexual, violent, right? Because what happened was Sidney Poitier films, many felt he was asexualized, not being a cisgendered man, right? Interracial, dating white women, and never show a sex scene. So we're going to shift that. We also know when Black folks in films, they die first. So with the blaxploitation, whether it's Pam Grier and Foxy Brown, the Black people are winning. They're taking it to the man. They're being produced by Black film crews. However, the message doesn't appeal to all Black people, just like the new Negro. I'm not educated. I'm rural. I don't go to Morehouse. I work in a farm. So for many Blacks, felt like blaxploitation is taking the race back. So let's have films like Uplift films, Sounder, right? Learning Tree by Gordon Parks, right? Okay, where they show Black people being positive. You see, Black people in moving, work, struggling against racism and surviving. Again, the myth that if we show these films to white people, they'll change their perspective of how they view African Americans. There's no data that supports that, right? Wow, I didn't know I was complicit to racism. I saw a Sounder, okay, right? But nevertheless, that's what's rooted, okay? So you have two types of film communities that we still see today. There's Tyler Perry films, which doesn't deal with racism, right? All his films kind of deal with internal issues within Black communities, right? Church, dating, you see what I mean? Black men, are there any good Black men, right? He doesn't make any films for white. He says, my audience are Black people. I don't need white acceptance. I don't need the Grammys. And he has what? The $1 billion studio in Atlanta. And very few white people see his films. And a lot of middle-class Black people can't stand his films. However, he has a studio where they shot Black Panther and Black films. So again, his model is very popular amongst Black people, and this goes back to what Zora Hurston was saying, right? The majority of Black folks, 6 out of 10, 5 out of 7, right, just are more entertained with that stuff. It is what it is, right? They see themselves in Tyler Perry films. I go to church, right? There's no white people in my life. I have issues dating, whatever. While, you know, the more quote unquote highbrow films, right, quote unquote, okay, don't appeal to me. I'm not a lawyer, right? I don't do certain things, okay? So this is an ongoing discussion in terms of Black aesthetic and Black arts that we still see in 2021. Okay. Now we get to the collection. We see multiple themes rooted again in what I talked about earlier. African diasporic authentic experiences with an S. So some of the artwork we see start before 1619. Many of you are familiar with the 1619 debate, and there's another debate within a debate that Black history doesn't start with slavery and racism. So you see artwork that deals with pre-colonial, right? Before African Americans arrived in Jamestown. A thriving African aesthetic, whether it's the Benin bronzes or what other African art. So again, the 1619 project is rooted in the assumption that Black history is racism and struggle. And many people say that's a limited view of a long history, okay? What was it like in West Africa before the first Europeans stepped on the continent? In fact, you should watch this show on Netflix called High on the Hog, okay? They go to Benin to a restaurant where the gentleman prepares authentic Benin food. In other words, this food is what Beninians, Africans ate before any European came. And you see the connections between okra in West Africa and okra being a staple dish, rice and others. Please watch High on the Hog, and shows how those food traditions carried over from West Africa to United States. So saying that that's the argument, right? So through the food, Africans, before a chain and a whip and all this other stuff, had a thriving culture, whether it's in food and other institutions brought to this country. So that's why people have an issue with the 1619 start date, right? And that's a whole nother discussion we'll get to another time. All right, so African diaspora authentic experiences. We also find in the collection, we have Afrofuturism, Alma Thomas. So there was this whole belief again at one time, right? That Black people are so busy with the struggle, they have no time for science fiction, another myth. We know Octavia Butler, her work Kindred, really opened up this genre of Afrofuturism. We see George Clinton in Parliament Funkadelic, right? That doesn't make you less Black because you think of the future. You see what I mean? So when you create this notion that we only struggle against racism every day, it narrows the artistic choices. I want to write about I want to do work on the moon or the Mars. You can't do that. We got to struggle against police brutality. What? That's not every day. So Alma Thomas is Afrofuturism, Octavia Butler, and we see a lot of people now talking about Afrofuturism. It's okay to be Black and be into sci-fi, to be optimistic about the future, because we saw whether it's Star Wars and all these top sci-fi films, where are the Black people? It's like they just disappeared. George Lucas, come on, right? You have a whole industry of sci-fi where there's like 5 Black people. If you look at the entire Star Wars production, 9 films, there were only 3 Black characters. Take that to the bank. This is why art should be propaganda, right? Where Black children and white children see Black people in the future. That's why it all matters. But if we're stuck to the belief that you only get art, your art is about reacting to racism all the time. You're always reacting. What did Du Bois say? Love and enjoy, right? Zora Neale Hurston, there's no white people in her book. You see? So for white people, that becomes a challenge, right? Where do I fit when I'm outside this community, right? How do I read a book and I'm from New York, Upper West Side? First of all, I can't get through the language. Why does she write that way? She should use the Queen's language. These are not thespians. They're rural Black folk. Most white people in Appalachian are not thespians. You see? Okay. I love Gordon Parks' work, the photographer, right? Because again, let the images speak 1,000 words. Okay, the great one he had, the issue, I think he had one with the jazz folks at one time line. I think he did one for hip hop, right? Let the images speak. And he gets a range of Black images, right? Women, African American men, rural, urban. I think that's the brilliance of it. Because at the end of the day, Black people have never or will be monolithic. So you go through any exhibit, right? It's one artist's interpretation, right? And it's reflecting not just not a particular aspect of African American life, history, and culture. So I think we have to keep that in mind because it's so easy to slip in all Black people are this, all Black people are that, right? While for white people, we always can do, right? For white people, we know all white people aren't X, all white people are not rich, right? That African Americans, when you look at the artwork, keep that in mind. Okay. We also find pieces by Jacob Lawrence. Now, again, he's one where his pieces are very popular. You'll see him on TV shows, right? A lot of migration themes. We see in African history, migration is a massive theme, right? World War One, going to the north, World War II, going to the north, going to the west coast. Okay, migration is a theme, movement, right? Opportunity. We also realize that during both migration, many middle-class Blacks left the South to go north to make more money. So this ties into Tulsa, right? Remember last week we had the 100th anniversary commemoration, okay? So we saw that Black people migrate to these urban spaces for opportunity, but like anything else, it's complicated, okay? And we look at Tulsa, we look at these cities that suffered these racial massacres. I think I want us to keep in mind that let's not romanticize Black Wall Street, right? If you look at the statistics, most Black people were still poor. It was a small Black elite that, disproportionately benefited. And there's no going back. This whole notion that we can go back. Why do you want to go back to a time when Black people died at 35, the infant mortality rate was high, less went to college? You cannot replicate that because that assumes that it was a utopia. You see the images, I get it, you get sucked into it, but that's the Black elite. Out of a population of X, that's about what, 5%? What about the masses? So we look at the Tulsa and how we commodified it, Black banks, Black businesses, Black this, rather than focus on also policies. How to create policies to ensure income inequality, clean water, good schools, affordable housing. That's what the emphasis should be on, in addition to reparations piece, but policies, not Black capitalism. Black capitalism is not going to solve those problems. Now, a few folks are going to be rich, but it's not going to solve the deep, entrenched structural problems. So let's look at the Davises, which I find interesting, okay? So again, he's a letter carrier, right? But what did we say before? For many, they might call them organic intellectuals, right? The Pullman porters, right? Very active in working class. This is part of it. In African American history or American history in general, we don't talk enough about class, right? It's too top down. Lawyers, academics, you see what I mean? Professors, right? The masses of folks in civil rights are working class people, Black women, right? Pullman porters, federal workers like Mr. Davis, who him and his wife had a passion, was able to whatever extra money they had, invested in this passion. He didn't go to Morehouse, he didn't go to Harvard, but viewed the power of art. So you don't have to be college educated to be a critical thinker, okay? And we see that in the collection, all right? And we see that, and he's not the only one, right? That many African Americans who are not college educated are passionate about history, are passionate about culture, but also the class thing is real, okay? Both gainfully employed, which provides them the resources, to engage in their passions. And fortunately for us, we get to see the great works they've collected, right? So you don't see either one with a PhD and all the, all the middle class or bourgeois accoutrements with it, right? We see that these are two individuals who committed to studying African American art. So we'll end on this here. It's like I said earlier, right? When you think of Black art, think race, think class, think gender, think experiences with an S, right? When you see African Americans like myself, you would never know my parents are from the West Indies. We have a lot of African Americans now whose parents are Nigerian, right? But they're born here. So we also, so African American, that's changing every day, right? So we can't assume, okay, just looking at me, I know what Black Southern culture is. You can't assume looking at so-and-so, he must be like X. So the artwork's going to reflect that complexity. So we can't be lazy and assume all Blacks this, they all that, or this representation is more authentic than another. I think that's the challenge we have when we look at African American art, right? It's just easy to say that, okay, rather than this is one person, right? This is Tyler Perry's interpretation of Black life. This is Spike Lee, one person. These are the Davises who's collected artists whose this is their interpretation of Black lives and experiences. So as viewers of this collection, we want to keep that in mind, right? Looking at the diversity of authentic experiences, not only in the United States, but also in the diaspora. And I'll stop there for questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. So if anyone has any questions, you can either use the chat function or you can simply quickly unmute yourself if you don't mind being on camera. The floor is open to questions.
Well, Dr. Canton, if you don't mind, I would like to say that I've often thought about how Americans don't like to talk about class. They certainly don't. They don't like to talk about race, but they sure don't like to talk about class. And what you've said gives quite a bit of credibility to that. Thank you for saying it. It's a tough subject, to be sure. You know, I was born with privilege. I was white. I was able to go to college and all that. And yet, you know, I like to try to think of myself as a liberal, you know, an open-minded person. But it's very difficult to, you know, sort of establish where I stand in the class structure, because that's a very difficult topic. You know, I myself, I'm a grandson of an immigrant, so you know, maybe I got lucky. You know, my parents, you know, moved up in the social structure pretty rapidly, and that's not available to everybody. Certainly, you know, but I think that you really pointed to a very important part of our overall experience as Americans.
Well, I think, well, like you said, in how it's socialized, right? We're Americans, right? We left Europe, right? So the whole notion, Marxism, 1848 in Europe, right? That in America, right, people can come here, work, indentured servants, all of a sudden you're voting, right? That there's a mobility train here. That's the assumption. That's what we're taught. That's what we're socialized. Now, is that a reality? No, because there's people that were doing it. Unfortunately, in the structure, there are many more who couldn't do it because of class.
Exactly.
So that's right, and that's the challenge, right? Look at Black people, right? There was African Americans in spite of racism that did X. But when you study societies and structure, those are the anomalies. We're taught to focus on anomalies in American history. Don't be pessimistic. Look at LeBron James. You can be next. No, I'm not. Stop. You can be a billionaire. No, I'm not. You're such a defeatist. No, it's statistics. So that's the problem. We look at Black and race and class. Yes, we want Black businesses. See, that becomes you want Oprah, but the billionaires aren't going to save Black people. Does that mean not to support Black businesses? I'm saying it's not a panacea, but that's how it's sold. Y'all need to open more businesses. Everyone can't own a business. That's nonsense. You see what I mean? And then class itself is, I tell my students, most people work for their money or working class. But because how we've been socialized, if you wear a white shirt, cultural proclivities, I like Martha's Vineyard, you like X, you like golf, I like this, that we allow that to keep us from working together, focusing on bread and butter issues. You like polo, I like this. That has nothing to do with clean water, voting, good schools, but we allow that. If you got a union card and I don't, those are all ways to give false consciousness that we share more in common because we all work, right? There's only 655 billionaires in this country who make money without working. Unfortunately, we just don't understand that race class. We just don't. And it's how we're socialized, right? It's real easy, right? I mean, you know, if you and your wife are good two lawyers, you're making $400,000 or $500,000 a year, you're not thinking working class. I live better than 95% of Americans. You know, so why should I engage in class issues, right? You know, so it's complicated. I'm glad you brought it up. So we see for Black art, you're trying to appeal to middle-class white people. Let's use middle-class Black people, almost like we're like you, just black skin, and you'll change your behavior. The reality is that it has nothing to do with systems. Black people are diverse people, and we should show all those perspectives. However, when you bring the liberal, like you said, money people, I'm gonna get $1 million to do about what? I'm gonna change my theme, because that's how you get funded. You know, if you want to talk about, you know, sex workers and drugs and all that, you're not getting funding. Now, that's going to change later, because then it flips the other way, because by the 60s, you're only talking about poor urban Blacks. So if you're middle class Black, well, you're not really Black. Remember the Cosby Show?
Yeah.
So those are not Black people. So by then we bought an myth that every Black person is poor. So you go from one extreme to another extreme, and they change over time. My thing is, let's get to a point where the Black community has been diverse forever. Stop jumping all over the place, right? You know, anytime it should be whatever show comes out is a small representation of the Black people, whether they're rich, poor, working class, and not these extremes. So the 60s, we went 20s, we're middle class and making it. Everybody's broke. To the Cosbys, there's no rich Black people. And now I think we're the point, there are more diverse representations, not because of Hollywood's being nice, because what? It makes money, right? This makes money now, so we can afford ranges of Black experiences. And even many white fans latch on to ranges of shows, whether it's Tyler Perry or Issa Rae, you know, that watches their work. So it takes time, but that's how race and class and really capitalism works in art production, as you know.
I have a question. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, okay. I wonder, in this collection at the Lyman Allyn,
Yep.
if you know how many of the artists are descendants of slavery,
Okay.
and how many came more recently from Africa or the Caribbean, and how does their background affect their art?
That's a great question. So obviously, right. So we know that, right. So if we look through, I think some showed, many were born in the States, right? So again, you know, I guess I have no genealogy in front of me, but I think for each individual artist, I think it's what, for Gordon Parks, you know, there's no photographs of like ancient Ghana. You know, I mean, you can't take your camera and take a photograph of ancient Ghana, right? Obviously, you know, so I think for some, it's just an individual choice, right? For some African-American artists, right, really focusing on pre-colonial Africa is a choice, whether their parents are born there, whether they're enslaved or not. You see what I mean? But I think for many artists, you know, like I said, it's just a personal choice. If they had enslaved parents or enslaved grandparents, doesn't mean they want to do artwork that addresses slave markets in Charleston. You see what I mean? But I think for them, you know, the African American aesthetic, right? Black folks in America, I think, drives most of this work, because that's where they know, that's where they've grown up. Not saying you can't study African art, but again, African art has its own aesthetics. You see what I'm saying? So I think that's why they have an African American focus, because that's their expertise, where they're from, what they know, right? Zora Neale Hurston is not doing a book on the Ashanti in Ghana. He didn't show anything about those folks, right? She studied anthropology in America. You see what I mean? So again, that's how these work. But however, Zora Neale Hurston recognized that there's African cultural retention in these communities. Okay. However, that's why it's called African American, right? And that's what Zora Neale's work shows, that synthesis. But that's a great question. But I think it's definitely individual choice by the artists themselves.
Excuse me, you know, when you were talking there, I just thought about some of the works that are in the show.
Yep.
And so I was bold enough to close down your screen and show
Go
this.
ahead, brother.
Here.
We on the same page.
But you know, the thing is that for me, I think that if we're going to be talking about class in America, I think McDonald's might just come up in that conversation at some point in time. And here's a picture, a painting of a scene in McDonald's. But it seemed to me that it resonated with me the way you were talking about how Du Bois said that, you know, you got to cut through the chase and have go for the aesthetics to get across the point, you know. And here is a scene that could be about class, but frankly, I just see that it's a beautiful picture. You know, it's full of life. It's got great colors. I mean, you can, as so much art is, you can see in it whatever you are looking for, kind of. And you know, you can certainly see the class in here as well. And I think that one of the things that characterizes the Davis collection, in my opinion, is that it has some of these very multiple layered, many layered images that can speak to you from different perspectives. And that some of them are just plain old beautiful, if you even sort of throw off the yoke of race and color, they are like plunging through the mirror and showing you something that's beautiful. Others are telling you a story. It's a great show from that perspective, right?
And I think you're right. So I think for them, they're not going to throw away blackness. I think that's part of it, you know, that is Black art. But if you look at Mickey D's, Byron Allen just put a lawsuit. McDonald's, 60% of their money comes from Black people, but they only advertise 10% of Black media. Now, he just won a lawsuit from Comcast. So really, in other words, he understands how racial capitalism works. That Black people for years, whether it's art, we're spending a lot of more money in low, because this is cheap food, right? But not get, now again, it's the race class thing, because Byron Allen's gonna benefit, right? So again, that's the thing, right? Disproportionately benefit over the people eating this killer food. But nevertheless, right? So I think this is a great piece. So if you look at it, so when I see Mickey D's, I'm thinking that it's cheap food, right? And let's just throw it out, but he has a lawsuit going on right now as we speak. But like I said, the colors are bold, you know, no doubt about it. And yes, McDonald's is a working class, low income spot for cheap, quick food that is killing people, but they don't advertise with Black people, you know. So it's kind of interesting. But I think for these artists, they're bold about unapologetically Black. You know, I think that's the thing, you know, that's the reality, and it's okay to say that, you know. But I think also that, again, various Black experiences, I think that's what we want to get from this talk, because it's so easy to say there's only one way how Black people live. That one friend you have, or the few you know on the campus, it doesn't make sense. That's not true. And we want art to reflect all of those and be just as valuable, but not just because the white literati who funds it says this is great. I think that becomes a problem, but I know why people chase that, because you become a MacArthur Genius Award and become rich, right? Or you can keep it real and do art that they don't understand, don't get the awards and get the big money, but you get the satisfaction. So again, that's that tension in there, you know, whether it's jazz, right? I want to play the esoteric jazz that only 6 people gonna listen to, or play popular jazz and be rich. You see what I mean? I want to make films that deep dive into Black communities' essence and soul that some Black people don't want to watch. Or I do popular stuff and be rich, okay? I see a question in the chat from Diane. How do we get white Americans to recognize the diversity of Black Americans, especially in the age of wokeness? Well, definitely coming to this exhibit, these talks. I think what I'm advocating in this next academic year, please do the best you can to continue going to Zoom talks. I know Florida, we're continuing to do Zoom events. So now it's a great way, whether you're a public university, where you see where your tax dollars are going and why these talks are important. That most learning is outside the classroom where it's low stakes. I'm not going to test y'all. Yo, Steve, there's a test tomorrow. Send me the answers, right? So you learn better when there's no pressure. So I encourage all of you this academic year, as we're still in the post-George Floyd, we got a lot going on. The election 2022 is coming up, to continue to attend Zoom events at Connecticut College, UConn, try to keep going. And once you go to these events, you see scholars and different topics. And that's how you start seeing the diversity of African Americans, right? Because the scholars are going to talk about different aspects of Black experiences, whether it's diasporic, working class, LGBTQ, you see what I mean? That's how you learn about it, through going through these events. Don't wait on CNN. Don't wait on, most television shows, because they too are rooted in stereotypes that we understand. It's easy. We don't have to think, right? We just lock in, and that's why we watch particular shows. But hopefully continue to attend these talks will give you more perspective on these experiences, particularly around Black History Month. You'll see Women's History Month. So please, what you want to do is contact the universities. If you have any Zoom events, let me know. And they're free, like this one. And you stay at home in your shirt and you have your jammies on, no judgment. Great way to learn. You see what I mean? It's a great medium. So I'm continuing to do it at UF. I know Khan's going to do it. I encourage you to keep doing that. And you're learning on the fly from these type of exchanges. You learn way more than, I'm going to give you a 700-page book to read and a test. You're not reading the book. You're not doing a test. But we're done in 20 minutes. You feel fulfilled. Bang. You know what I mean? So definitely do that. But I like that question. Here's another one. What impact has the Black Lives Movement had on greater public's interest in Black art, literature, and other forms? Now, this is where capitalism comes in, right? We saw with Colin Kaepernick, Nike gave him $100 million, right? Global capitalism, hegemony, right? Antonio Gramsci, hegemony, right? Okay, capitalism says, you know what, Phil Knight, this thing's shifting. Let's get involved in it. Even though he might vote Republican, he sees capitalism in wokeness, okay? But like you said, so now people are going to buy Black art, support Black books, or the few Black artists that we know until maybe a couple of years from now. We want to get to the point that it shouldn't take Black death for white people to understand Black people. Why does someone have to get murdered to read a Black book? That doesn't make sense, right? Why do you have to just read every day? Go to a bookstore, go online, don't wait, watch C-SPAN, don't wait for Black death to read the hot Black book to feel cool. You see what I mean? And that's what Kindies work, right? Man, I'm gonna read this Kindy book, because I wanna feel woke or be part of the movement, not less racist. It doesn't do with all that. What I'm saying is make it part of your life to some degree, right? Make it part of your thinking, right? Black art, if you're an art person, there's exhibits all across this country, go online, the Schomburg, whatever. I think that's more authentic than the spur of the moment, right? What's good today, then 6 months from now, you're like, I'm on to something else. I think that's when people get frustrated. It's reactionary and not proactive empathy, right? We react, okay, I'm gonna be cool today. In about 6 months, we're on to something else, right? But it shouldn't take the murder of someone to realize that Black art culture is just as valuable as anybody else's. And if we all took more time out, the nation would be so much further. Okay. Let's see.
Oh, quickly,
Yes.
Michelle Dunlap had a question. Michelle,
Okay. Hey, Michelle, how you doing? It's been a minute.
Hi, Dr. Canton. How are you? I'm so glad to see you and have truly enjoyed your talk.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to say was I appreciated the inclusive way that you defined art in your talk, that you drew from a lot of different disciplines, a lot of different ways of doing art.
Right.
So I wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I was particularly captivated by some of the things that you said about the films. And as you were speaking, I know you mentioned a lot of really great films that that have meant a lot to African American people, and probably some films that have meant a lot to America,
Right.
like Black Panther.
Yep.
But I was reminded of a couple of films while you were talking, and I was just wondering if you would briefly comment on them. One is the 1959 Imitation of Life, which my grandmother and I used to talk about. She would tell me when I was about 12 years old, she would tell me about going to the movies, getting all dressed up. She said in 1959, she got all dressed up and went to the movie theater to see that movie. And she cried and cried and cried and swore that she would never see it again.
Wow.
So that only made me want to see it more.
Gotcha. Yep.
And it turns out to be, you know, just one of those movies that you can never forget.
Correct.
I wasn't too crazy about the 1937 version or whatever, but the 1959 version really blew me away. And I was wondering if you had thoughts about it. Then the other film is a more modern one that captivated me a lot, and that was Moonlight.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Yep.
And I thought that it took a topic that could be considered so stereotypical and told the story in such a non-stereotypical way. And I don't know if that was the draw or what, but again, that's another one of those films that you can never forget. I was just wondering if you would just briefly comment on those two films. Thank you so much.
It's a great question. So I know Imitation Life. My wife's a filmmaker, and she shows that in her class. I've seen her. She got in her house, DVD, VHS, YouTube, you know, definitely a classic film. And that's the one with the Aunt Jemima formula, right? Is some deal? Was that it with the pancake mix? Is that it? Imitation of Life?
I think for the 1937 version.
Gotcha, right.
But for the 1959 version, that's where the daughter, she looks white and her mother looks very obviously Black. And she spends her teen years completely rejecting her Black mother.
Right.
And the book was written by a Jewish person. And there's a lot of interesting history about that, about the movie was made from the book that was made by a Jewish person. But they say that the movie is a metaphor for how white America treats its minority populations. And so it wasn't until the mother died that the daughter began to really appreciate her mom.
And I think one whole notion, we go back to twin passing, right? This whole J. Rogers wrote books about Superman the Man. He was a writer, did these books basically laughing at color, right? That it's a construct, right? You know, what's white, what's Black, and there's many people out in our nation's history that, you know, in fact, go to LSU in the 50s, the many Black people went to these southern schools who passed for white. And I can see why, right? I'm going to the top flagship university. You know, it just really takes a play on how silly it is, but it's so real, right? Wow, that's silly, doesn't make sense, but there's implications and benefits and privileges playing that game, you know, in terms of passing. And I see many families fight. Look at the whole Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, right? Man, they were pissed off, all angry and stuff, rather than these are human beings, right? So it just shows you how the depth of this issue. Into Moonlight, if you haven't seen it, Barry Jenkins, right, about look at Black gay males. And again, you know, well done, brilliant story. In fact, when I went to see it with my son, a woman asked him, what is the trap? You know, the dude became a drug dealer, like the guy. What is the trap? You know? So he said, well, you know, he's selling drugs. You know, the trap is a euphemism where there's no other way out. And then people say for most Black Americans, we're all in the trap. It's all relative. Whether you're a professor, a doctor, a lawyer, all in this trap of racism in America. But again, the argument that some people are saying is that you can't, your whole life isn't just reacting to racism. That's defeatist and victim stuff, right? There is a structure of it, but at the same time, most folks are here fighting through that thing and see the joy in that. So I think, again, with Black art, it's not always have to be reacting to racism every day. That's why I look at the Zora Neale Hurston stuff. I'm writing about Black people. There's no white people. And for many white liberals, they're mad. Where's the racism? I get it on a substance, but my day is the church, the school. There's no white people in my block. As many whites is like just throws them off. And for many middle-class blacks, sometimes it's like you got to put that in there. So again, artists have the choice, do what they want to do. I think we have to embrace that and get away from this monolithic stuff.
Yeah.
It's a disaster. You know, just do it. If you want to do Afrofuturism, black people in the moon, or black people swimming as sharks, do it. Who cares? Rather than that's what white people do. That's not a freedom. You know. So, but those are great questions. I'm gonna get to another one.
Thank you. Thank you
No
so
problem.
much.
Thank you, Michelle. How you doing? I saw something. Kerry James Marshall. So again, I see he's West Coast, right? Also, a little about Gordon Parks, but this whole notion of, we talk about African Americans, is that this whole notion of style, right? The argument is that when you look at Africa, whether it's Negro Leagues baseball, when you look at Black cultural production, this thing of style is so valuable, right? The Black aesthetic is based on functionality and creativity. If you look at Simone Biles, right? She's doing something that nobody else can do, but she's penalized. In Black aesthetics, you are rewarded for creativity. If you can't do it, you better step your game up and you better learn to do it. You see what I mean, right? Go look at Simone Biles, right? She's doing something nobody else can do. The judges are saying it's too hard. We can't give you the extra points. In Black aesthetics, you get rewarded for creativity. So you look at this whole notion of Kerry James Marshall's work. I want to show that style and aesthetic from dressing to walking to speaking, right? That African people have created this thing that's very valuable. Now, I think the downside is sometimes, right? If you're African American, you're not the best dancer, then you hear, oh, you know, something wrong, rather than, right? Cultures are learned. We're one to socialize. It's not genetic, right? If you're in a socialized area where this dancing is valued, you're going to be a good dancer. Where it's not, you might be average. But nevertheless, his work tries to show that, whether you see it in how people speak, dance, engage, athletics. Negro League baseball, they stole bases. White baseball said you can't do that. Why not? That doesn't make sense. You see what I mean? Now look at baseball now. The bat flip, my Dominican brothers. Remember, you couldn't do that with white baseball. That's why y'all don't go to the games. They're boring. You put that bat flip, Koreans do it. Now it's exciting because American baseball realized that those rules are stupid. But this whole but again, in European aesthetics, this whole notion, not, sportsmanship, these definitions where in these traditions, if you give a home run, you better just pitch better. Don't hate because I bat flipped you, strike me out. Don't penalize me because I can do a move nobody else can do. You step your game up. But that's a culture aesthetic clash. So his work wants to show Black aesthetics as they are, walking, talking. You see what I mean? Doesn't mean it's better than anybody, but it's something unique that this culture does. I always try to avoid Olympification of culture. This isn't the Olympics, ballet, hip hop, European classical, African, that's all nonsense, right? You see what I mean? And again, they're not genetic, right? White people can do jazz. Black people can do opera. That's another myth. That's nonsense. Drives me crazy. Okay, let me keep going. We got 2 more minutes. Great questions. Whitney. Oh, okay. Paul Laurence Dunbar, great point, right? Dunbar was known for work, again, writing in that vernacular. He's out of Ohio, Paul Laurence Dunbar, out of Ohio, and wrote in the vernacular. These are how these folks speak, right? And it's okay. But for many middle-class Blacks, it's embarrassing. That's the old Carl G. Woodson Miseducation Negro, right? You want to run from that. It's like when my cousins came from the Caribbean, that kind of country, I felt embarrassed. Like, who am I? Their clothes a little older, you know what I mean? Their jeans weren't up to date, their sneakers were old. I was kind of embarrassed. Like when your rural country folk come up north, man, you embarrassing me, man. Stop. But that's changing. If we look at hip hop, New York's not the center no more. It's Atlanta. When I went to school in '86, I was like the king. Run DMC? I used to lie. Yeah, they're my cousins. But now we see that Atlanta, where 60% of Black people live in the South, we see now that doesn't carry as much weight anymore. This rush to be urban. I think now if you go to rural Mississippi, you go to rural Georgia, you go to rural Mississippi, that there's hip hop in those towns that say, I don't want to be urban. I don't want to be New York. I want to be rural Mississippi because that's who I represent. That's who I'm proud of. That's my aesthetic. I think that's beautiful. rather than you trying to imitate and sound like me from the Bronx. You never left Mississippi. That doesn't make sense. And that's when you get to be inauthentic and you're not original. That's a fraud, and people will find you out in a minute. And I think part of Black creative experience is about being authentic. Who are you, right? Write about what you know. Zora Neale Hurston, Eatonville. I can't write about living in Alaska. Never been there, right? I don't know anything about third generation wealth. I'm first generation. What is that like? Tell me, you see? Okay. Okay, here's another question from Arlene. I wonder how art museums might be affected by the critical race theory debate. Oh yeah, I think this is a great question to end on. Okay, first of all, what is critical race theory? The people who are critiquing it don't know what they're talking about, right? They're seeing racism again as individual feelings, right? We know, okay, out of sociology 101, there's something called social structure. Racism is a system, right? An oppressive system based on race that provides privileges and power, whether material or psychological, to a particular group, okay? So we know it's systemic. Critical race theory says, guess what? We're gonna study that. So whether you're white, it's not about feelings. We know you didn't own slaves. Most white people never owned slaves. Out of 8 million white people in 1860, only 350,000 owned slaves, and less than only like 2,000 owned over 200. It was a top-down enterprise. So in other words, we want the critical history of race, of gender, and these other areas, so we do a better understanding to avoid the loopholes we see today. But what the anti-critical race theory has done, it created boilerplate policy. We get a boilerplate and we run it through the states, and they all say the same thing, single messaging. This is gonna destroy America, and we start running all over the place. So for art museums who are funded by conservative groups, this is key. It goes back to my argument earlier, right? Dave, you want this funding, right? Oh man, I need to eat. Damn, we're about to close. Nobody goes to museums. I need you to tone it down a bit. Okay, I'll try. That's right, because major donors who are moderate to right, major donors are now going to say, if you want my 20 million, you need to tone this art down. We want an art that promotes American democracy and equality. Yes, there's racism. That was a blip, but now there's all this stuff, right? That's a great question. And for those in the art world, have to be strategic. I think it starts with understanding the language of critical race theory, which I tried to explain, right? We're looking at a system, but as we said in America, we're socializing individuals, right? Poor people want to be poor. Black people should behave better. The police leave us alone. Women should stop wearing short dresses. Gay people should just straighten up. Don't be all flamboyant, and everything will go away. Wrong, right? It's an oppressive system that's in all our institutions, education, religion, the art world. We want to educate so that these institutions are inclusive, right? We're not ranking culture. We're not blaming victims no more. We're understanding sexual assault is power. We're understanding racism is a system. Poor people want to work, but the wealthy people are greedy. That's what's critical race theory. So it's not even just race, it's class, as you pointed out, it's gender. It gets to all these oppressive systems, but they trick you and think it's only Black people. Just like affirmative action, the number one beneficiaries have been white women. So it's another trick. They're going to teach you to hate America. No, they're going to teach you to be a critical thinker. Then you realize that clean water, universal health care, inclusive museums, infrastructure, the stimulus checks, look at the economy. They didn't return the stimulus checks, did they? Right? That's why the economy's booming. But because of the miseducation and the race baiting and all that myth, this is what's happening. So I applaud that question. All of us need to be on double duty. And how do we fight this? Because it's real. They will stop donations based on this myth that you're teaching hate. We didn't have a conversation on hate. We had a great conversation. We're learning. That's education. We're getting to become a propaganda. Right? This is like we complain about China and Russia. I'm just saying. Last I heard was still a democracy. That's what I've heard, but now it's impacting our education. And that's making me frustrated if I can't do this work and I have to, you know, stand up there and tell half truths and make stuff up. That's just not how I operate. I want to have this discussion. That's why I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the work you're going to do. It's going to be a tough year because it's not stopping. I mean, there's an assault in these states. I mean, it's a big, massive thing. And my problem is they don't argue. I'm gonna stop on this. In the 90s, this whole thing of multiculturalism was the attack. I remember Arthur Schlesinger, when Asante and Black Studies was building up, but at least they based it on arguments. These folks just lie. They don't make them, there's no evidence. So when you got your opponent lying, that means they have nothing else, not a policy, right? At least in the 90s, well, they said, well, Dr. Asante, we disagree with this based on this. Now they just lie. And they double down on the lie. That's frustrating and that's dangerous. And we see where that line's getting us to voter suppression. And I think in the art world, like you brought up, do we shut these exhibits down? They don't preach America. What are you talking about? Jacob Lawrence, Black folks are America. So we got a lot of work to do on all our institutions, but I appreciate the invite. Keep fighting the fight. You know, I try to be optimistic, but I think, you know, just got some work to do. And I think the work we've done tonight is just the start, but I appreciate the invitation. I can go all night. I'm going to stop. You know, I get all fired up because, you know, I just love doing this work. And I really get frustrated when I hear certain people talk like, what the hell are they talking about? Last point, QAnon conference, 28% of Republicans believe that stuff. That's 3 in 10. So that means in some districts, it could be a majority. And as John Meacham said, you got to get to 60%. Think about that. You're at 28%. If we can get another 10 who are on the fence, I'm just saying. So you add the critical race theory myth, that fires people up to like, we need to do something. It starts in the school and just saying. So let's keep the fight. Let's be optimistic, register to vote, get engaged, keep doing what you're doing. And I enjoyed the presentation, enjoyed the questions. Have a great summer, and we'll be in touch.
Good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Canton. I know everyone loved this talk, and it was a great way to bring this discussion to us. A reminder to everyone that the exhibition is on view until August 22nd. So we do hope you are able to come see it in person. There's a lot to take in, so hopefully come more than once. And we do have another talk in relation to this exhibition coming up in a few weeks, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you for coming and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great summer.
Thank you.